The talk show host, James O'Brien, joins us now live. Goodness, what happened?
Almost as you'd be able to glean from that brief clip of what was quite a surprisingly long conversation, actually. I know it's not a terribly fashionable view to take in this day and age, Kay, but I'm a great believer in marriage for a number of reasons, and one of those reasons is that if children are born into a relationship where there hasn't been a marriage, I think they have less rights under the law than perhaps the children of marriages do. It's something we've been talking about quite a lot recently, because last week it emerged, of course, that more women in this country under 25 now have a baby than a husband. And this story for me played into that, because Frank Lampard's ex-fiancée, Elen Rives, had given quite an emotional interview to a journalist, which first appeared yesterday and didn't go refuted, and then was repeated in some newspapers today, in which she made it quite clear that her former fiancé remained in the previous family home, while her and their two very young girls were living in temporary accommodation in a flat, waiting to see what would be sorted out for them. And I don't really feel there's anything remotely controversial about suggesting that a man who remains in more comfortable and luxurious circumstances than his two children has quite a lot to answer for.
Especially if it's not true, though. I mean, I spoke to Frank Lampard's people this morning, and they tell me that she is waiting to go into a £3.5 million house that Frank is providing her and the daughters with. They're waiting for that to be finished, because it's just down the road from Frank, so that he can have the kids 3 days a week and Ellen has them 4 days a week.
I take your point, but the deal is...
It's quite a big point, really, isn't it, James?
Well, you could say that if you want, Kay, but were you aware of that when you read the newspaper story this morning, or did you only get in touch with Frank Lampard's people after my radio programme went out?
Well, I was aware of it before, yes, while you're asking, but that's not really the point. The point is
then, I mean, journalistically, if I had been, I'd have broadcast that. I'm surprised you didn't. The point about my encounter with Frank Lampard today is really very simple. I used his story as an illustration of a much bigger picture. At 10 o'clock every morning on LBC, my job is to cull items from the news which I feel will be of relevance and interest to real people with real stories. Astonishingly, the person who was the inspiration for the tale felt sufficiently passionate about the story to get in touch with the programme, and he put his case extremely well, and I enjoyed talking to him. My contention remains that a man who expects to stay in the house out of which his children subsequently move is behaving in a manner that I consider to be unsatisfactory. I wouldn't do it myself, and I'm allowed to say that I disapprove of people that don't. Just because he's a millionaire footballer doesn't mean he should be judged by any moral standards different from some poor soul appearing on the Jeremy Kyle programme and being hauled over the coals for being feckless and irresponsible.
Maybe they didn't want to stay in that house. It's not really for us as journalists to make those comments, is it?
Which is why, if you listen to the full transcript of the tape, you will hear me suggesting to him that he actually agrees that a man typified by his own ex-fiancée would be beneath contempt. I'm going on unrefuted quotes in an interview given by the mother of his children. I'm astonished you haven't...
Two sides to every story.
Pardon?
Two sides to every story.
Precisely, which is why I told one and he told the other, Kay.
Yeah, but do you feel that it was appropriate to describe people like Frank Lampard as weak and scum when you don't know what the circumstances are?
Well, I mean, it's not really a question that merits much of an answer. If I don't know what
go on, indulge me.
Well, I described circumstances, and then I concluded that anybody following that pattern of behaviour, anyone living in those circumstances, was weak and was, yes, scum. I still completely stand by that. Frank Lampard put a very compelling case for why he doesn't deserve to be contained within that category. And as ever on my programme on LBC, it's entirely up to listeners to decide what their opinion is on the subject. I'm not going to tell them what to think. I'm merely going to put things before them and invite them to arrive at their own conclusions, which Frank did, his sister did, and you know, there's several 100,000 people listening did, and do every morning.
Shocking timing, though, wasn't it?
With regard to the anniversary of his mother's death?
Yes.
Well, absolutely regrettable. That's the only element of the exchange for which I apologise to his sister, because it's unpleasant to have any family laundry washed in public on a day of enormous emotion and poignancy. But, I mean, again, I don't want to sound flippant. I doubt you've got that anniversary in your desk diary.
I have.
Well, Hosanna.
Are you sorry?
For what?
For the way you behaved today.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, the question... OK, let me put it in a different way. Obviously, I'm not articulating as well as you do. Are you sorry that you misinterpreted the interview today in the newspaper to such an extent that Frank Lampard, who was grieving for his mother's anniversary of her death, felt it necessary to ring up and say, you're upsetting my family.
I don't deliberately set out to upset anybody, but I am not sorry for holding a view that a man who stays in the family home from which his children move out deserves to be pilloried and criticised. And I mean, I don't perhaps I need to explain how radio phone-in works. If you hear something you don't like being uttered by a presenter, you can phone in and take him to task over it. Frank Lampard happens to be famous, so you're getting terribly excited about it. I take calls from passionately aggrieved people every day. I take calls from people who've had experiences that are considerably more poignant and difficult than Frank Lampard's every single day. It's just that generally Sky News and yourself don't show much interest in it because they're not famous.
Oh, come on. I think that's a little bit beneath you, James. I just wonder whether you have been a little bit guilty today.
The man who's just buried his wife who died from MRSA and broke down in tears on my show the other day. Get him on to talk about his experiences because they're going to be just as relevant as this.
We do. Thank you. You know, our running order tends to reflect, as I'm sure yours does, what's happening in society as a whole. But I just wonder...
Rather in the news, Kay, not in society, because that occurrence was in society. It just wasn't in the news. Elen Rives' account of the breakdown of her relationship was, therefore it was fair comment. And if I had anything to hide or anything to be ashamed of, I wouldn't have let Frank Lampard on the phone. I relished the encounter and I enjoyed the conversation. It also is worth mentioning, because I suspect you won't, ended on very good terms.
It did end on very good terms, and I think we've played probably quite a lot of it already here on Sky News. I'm sure you're not suggesting for a second, James, that we have an agenda.
Me?
Are you?
No, of course not.
Just checking. Are you sorry? Do you want to apologise to Frank for the way things went today and the fact that you believed a story in the papers and frankly you should know better than that?
Again, you're repeating yourself. I believed a story in the papers that has not currently been refuted. Until I hear from the lady quoted that she was misrepresented and unfairly portrayed, then I stand by my comment. For what it's worth, the conversation I had with Frank Lampard convinced me that he is rather more of a man than I thought at 10 o'clock this morning, but that's often the case on my programme. I talk about things. I get educated by the callers. It's the essence of good phone-in radio.
Fantastic, and we always look forward to listening to it. Thanks very much.